Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan and I'm going through puberty. No, just joking. My voice is still kind of awful and I apologize for that. Luckily, the range of my voice where Morgan Freeman resides is still active, so I'm going to have him help us basically narrate this video. In our last episode, a humanitarian crisis is averted on the planet of Ryloth, thanks to the generous actions of the King of Toydaria. Today we journey to the core world regions of space where entire Republic fleets have mysteriously vanished. Now, something that I like to routinely remind people when talking about the Clone Wars is the fact that Chancellor Palpatine is constantly playing both sides of the war. Obviously, he needed to take great care to cover his tracks, which limits his opportunities to have an impact. But nonetheless, throughout the war, he feeds enough information to the Separatists to make them seem incredibly dangerous, which consequently also increases his own executive power and the power of the Grand Army of the Republic. So let's set the scene. The war is only months old, and the Republic Navy is suddenly losing entire patrols and fleets without warning. So it's almost as if there's some giant monster hiding in the shadows of the galaxy, basically eating Republic ships, and that's what some of the less reputable Holo News networks are basically reporting, which is creating hysteria throughout the entire galaxy, not just for clone sailors, but also for civilians who are traveling from system to system. Remember when that Air Asia flight disappeared a few years back and CNN was talking about alien abductions? Well, imagine that but 10 times worse, because not only are civilian ships disappearing, but so are state-of-the-art military ships with all sorts of weapons and defenses which are supposed to protect them from basically any threat. Anyway, in response, the Jedi Order send Master Plo Koon, master tactician and pilot with a fleet of Venator-class Star Destroyers, to actively search out whatever is causing this mess. Examining the coordinates of all the disappearances, the small task force arrives to the Abrigado system. Ahead of them, casually floating and backlit by the system's red star, is a gigantic Separatist ship. This has been the cause of all the recent disturbances, not some gigantic space monster, but a relatively normal, if not impressive, subjugator-class heavy cruiser. While not the most common ship in the Separatist arsenal, it was a catalog Separatist ship created by Free DAC Volunteers Engineering Corps. For those who don't know, DAC is what the Corans call Mon Cala, a planet which they shared with the Mon Calamari. The squid, like Corans, didn't really get along with the Mon Calamari, and during the Clone Wars, they would side with the Separatists, and the Mon Cala would side with the Republic, creating essentially a civil war on the planet. This was actually quite a common occurrence during this period of time, and it was basically happening all over the galaxy. Now, based on its mass and known armament alone, a 4,800-meter subjugator-class heavy cruiser like the Malevolence was more than large enough to take on 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers and their complement of starfighters. Luckily, Plo Koon was quite an experienced commander, and he quickly contacted GAR Central Command and asked for reinforcements.
I think it wise to report our position before we attack.
This is something a more reckless Anakin probably wouldn't have done. And luckily, Plo Koon reached his reinforcements before Count Dooku and General Grievous on board the Subjugator-class heavy cruiser jammed their comms. The Subjugator-class heavy cruiser is around 4 times longer than a Venator-class Star Destroyer. This means it's so long that it has its own internal train system. It also had an enormous sensor and communication suite, which was incredibly powerful, allowing them to completely black out all communications in the vicinity. As a rule in Star Wars, the larger a ship, the larger its power source, and therefore the more powerful its subsystems are. But what really made the Malevolence so dangerous were the gigantic discs that sat on both sides of the cruiser at midship. These were actually a pair of the largest ion cannons ever created. Ion weapons fire disruptive particles, which were able to disable any electrical or computer system it encountered, while leaving all organic life safe and sound. The scale of this ion cannon meant that not only was it incredibly powerful, but the size of the pulse was kilometers wide and incredibly hard to avoid, especially if you didn't expect it to fire upon you. And that's exactly what happens to Plo Koon's fleet. Arranged in attack formation, they weren't able to maneuver in time to avoid the Malevolence's giant ion pulse. This was partly due to the fact that the Republic fleet was clearly out of the range of traditional turbo laser fire, but what they didn't know was that the Malevolence's giant ion cannon had even a longer range than a turbo laser. And so quickly, all 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers in Plo Koon's fleet were struck by a massive ion pulse and disabled. Because ion pulses left organics untouched, this meant that repair crews could quickly tackle any problems with the most crucial systems on board. But powerful ion pulses, like the one coming from the Malevolence, had the nasty habit of destroying sensitive equipment, sometimes fusing components together, making the repair process quite complicated. Once all the Venator-class Star Destroyers were floating, dead in space, the Malevolence flew within turbo laser range and began pounding away at the defenseless ships. And because General Grievous and Count Dooku are grade A dickheads, they also started destroying the life pods that tried escaping from the ship. Now, from a tactical standpoint, the Malevolence is a maniacal and objectively brilliant design. Because no one was able to survive an encounter with it, it also meant that no one could figure out a way to defeat it. Anyway, Plo Koon and a few clones managed to avoid the destructive power of the Malevolence. All they can do is wait and pray that Anakin and his fleet comes in time to rescue them. It should be noted that this entire story arc with the Malevolence is actually based on the true story of the Bismarck, a large World War II era battleship that was hunted by a fleet of smaller British naval ships. In this case, the fleet of smaller ships being the several Venator-class Star Destroyers in the nearby Bith system, under the command of Anakin Skywalker. His Padawan, who originally was recruited to the Jedi Order by Master Plo Koon, vehemently wants to rush to the Abrigado system with their fleet of Venators, but orders from the Jedi Council and Chancellor Palpatine tell the two to stay put and defend the current system they are in. So Anakin and Ahsoka decide to leave their fleet and take a smaller shuttle to go scout out what has caused the communication blackout. They manage to find Plo Koon and extract him from the system before the Separatist forces can disable their ship. This is a huge victory for the Republic. Now they actually have a survivor who can explain to them what has been taking out all of their ships. Upon learning about the Malevolence's main ion cannon weapons, Anakin decides to use the newly shipped Y-Wing to attack the Separatist Heavy Cruiser. The idea is the smaller snub fighters are far more agile and therefore able to avoid the gigantic pulse weapons. They come up with this plan just in time because now the Malevolence has set its sights on an extremely vulnerable target, the Khalida Sol's Medical Center, home to 60,000 clones. Now there's no time to move all the wounded, so their only option really is to stop the Malevolence. Armed with the knowledge of how the Malevolence's main weapon functioned, Anakin was able to lead a group of Y-Wings into battle and mostly avoid the ion cannon. The problem they now faced was that the Subjugator-class heavy cruiser was massive, so even the turbo lasers and proton torpedoes they were able to hit it with weren't able to do much damage at all. Anakin, being the rational individual he was, decides to target the ion cannon instead. If they can take out the Malevolence's main weapon, then the rest of the Republic fleet will be free to engage the Malevolence. And with almost half of his fighters down, Anakin manages to strike the ion cannon while it's charging up and completely disables it. Now the chase is on and the hunter is being hunted. Even with the Subjugator Heavy Cruiser's main weapon disabled, the turbo lasers from the Republic fleet is still barely able to make a dent in the Separatist ship. What results is an O.J. Simpson-like slow-motion chase across the system. For now, the Malevolence is able to keep itself just ahead of the Republic fleet, but they are just delaying the inevitable. And more importantly, the vulnerable clone medical station has been spared from destruction. Now remember before when we mentioned that Palpatine is constantly playing both sides of the war. Sometimes it's relatively hard to see where his influence lies, but in this scenario, it's very clear. Chancellor Palpatine recognizes that he's about to lose General Grievous, a vital part of the war effort. So he concocts one of his typical evil genius plans by sending one Senator Padme Amidala right into the middle of the fray. Well, actually, she thinks she's on a mission to the intergalactic banking clans. You see, Chancellor Palpatine himself had given Padme hyperspace coordinates for this so-called secret meeting. Those coordinates, however, were bogus and put her directly in the path of the Malevolence. I don't really understand how the Jedi and Padme don't really connect the dots here. I mean, it's very clear that Palpatine has just fed her directly to General Grievous in his moment of need, and has given him a hostage that will buy him the extra time he needs. And that's exactly what Grievous does. He grabs onto Padme's ship with a tractor beam, complicating the situation. Padme is really the perfect hostage for this scenario. Palpatine was one of the few individuals who knew just what Padme meant to Anakin, who conveniently was commanding the Republic forces in this battle. Although Padme doesn't want Anakin to halt the attack on the ship that she's now currently being held as hostage on, we know Anakin can't really do that. And Anakin predictably calls for the Republic fleet to cease firing on the Malevolence and quickly puts together a rescue mission. Meanwhile, on the ship, Padme is no damsel in distress and booby-traps her own ship to explode and goes into hiding in the massive subjugator-class heavy cruiser. Anakin and Obi-Wan board the Malevolence. Their mission is now to find the missing senator. They're racing against the clock. The Separatist ship's hyperdrive has been damaged in the recent attack, but they were almost finished repairing it. Now, once the hyperdrive was finished, the Malevolence could then escape. While Anakin and Padme fight their way towards one another, Obi-Wan Kenobi confront General Grievous. Obi-Wan Kenobi's defensive fighting style is the perfect foil for General Grievous's more aggressive multiple limb attack style. But Obi-Wan realizes he's outnumbered and leads Grievous on a chase around the ship, distracting him long enough for Anakin and Padme to make it onto the bridge of the Malevolence, where they sabotage the nav computer. The next time someone activates the hyperdrive, it will send the ship headfirst into a nearby moon, which is exactly what happens. Unfortunately, General Grievous survives this encounter, but nonetheless, this is still a huge victory for Republic forces. And thus ends the story of the Malevolence. In our next episode, we're going to be looking at the Separatist plan to attack the clone homeworld of Kamino. So don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on that video. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.